That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about April, the sophomore film directed by Déa Kulumbegashvili, which premiered in competition at the 2024 Venice Film Festival, where it was awarded the special jury prize from the Isabelle Huppert-led jury. Metrograph Pictures is granting it a limited theatrical release stateside, April 25th, 2025.
I know you're a fan of this director's first film.
Yes, her debut was Beginning in 2020. That was the pandemic year. That is an exceptional film. If you have not seen that, I would run to see that. I think it's on Mubi. And I probably prefer that film just a hair over this one, but still, I think Kulumbegashvili is an exceptional storyteller. Notably, Luca Guadagnino was such a fan of her first film that he produced this feature.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. What is April about? Nina, an OBGYN, faces accusations after a newborn's death. Her life undergoes scrutiny during the investigation. She persists in her medical duties, determined to provide care others hesitate to offer, despite the risks. What is your pull quote?
Kulumbegashvili's sophomore feature, April, is nothing short of exceptional, an unfussy, painstaking exercise about guilt, martyrdom, and the seemingly endless wait for women to collectively wield agency over their own bodies. It is neo-realistic, neo-body horror of the highest caliber.
Mine. April is a powerfully quiet, moving examination of control and one woman's relationship to it.
This is a story about control.
Janet Jackson. Okay, so I'm going to try to tell the basic story. There is a lot of symbolism baked into this film, which I think is its strength, but we'll get to that after. So the lead character, Nina, is played by...
Sukhitashvili. Apologies for mispronouncing any Georgian surnames.
Yes, the story takes place in the country of Georgia in Eastern Europe, not the Peach State. Okay, so she's an OBGYN. The film opens with her delivering a baby, and it's stillborn. And we see the father is reacting very negatively to her, but the hospital administrator and one of Nina's colleagues are trying to reassure him that they will do a proper investigation, but that Nina is like the best they have. She's done thousands of deliveries, and this has never happened. But that father is still mad. He actually spits on her, and the reason he's so extra salty is because he knows that the town rumor is that Nina performs abortions, like illegal abortions, for women in these outlying villages who don't have access to that care.
Yes, or whose religious beliefs kind of stymie their ability to...
exercise their options.
Yes.
So the bulk of the movie, the thing driving it forward is the investigation, but it's very behind the scenes. We know that the administrator gives that task to Nina's colleague,
David, played by Kakha Kintsurashvili.
And we know that he and Nina were in a relationship 8 years prior, which we can get to. But initially it seems like maybe the administrator and her colleague are gonna handle her with like a tough fist, but it turns out that they sort of respect what she's doing, but also it doesn't make sense because it's illegal. She's going to get in trouble. She's risking her entire career to do this. And I think they're also sort of saying, like, why can't you just encourage these women to go to the capital city where they can do it? But like you already explained, there are factors that make that difficult. So the film, there are a lot of sort of like elongated shots that we'll get to, but sort of the main things that happen are we see Nina perform an abortion. We see her kind of cruise around town looking for sex.
Yeah, she likes no strings, much like a gay man does.
It's very cruising. We see her have sex with 2 different men. And in one of those encounters, we learn a little bit about her.
Which is really the only self-reflected detail we get about her.
And it's an important detail, which we'll get to in a second. But she, after performing the abortion, there's a storm. And her car gets stuck in the mud, which is important to the story. And so she has to go back to the house where she performed the abortion. But this time the man of the house is there. And it's awkward because the young lady who she performed the abortion on appears to be special needs.
They say she's deaf mute in the film.
And
it's not her first abortion.
no, and we'll get to all that, but it's clear, and then we learn it is clear that it is the man of the house who's like repeatedly sexually assaulting this girl. It's actually his sister-in-law. So the lady of the house is the sister of the deaf mute girl, and it's the husband who is assaulting her. But anyway, Nina goes back to work. We see her perform another delivery.
A C-section.
Which is important. And she gets called into the administrator's office.
Who's played by the way, Merab Ninidze, who's in quite a few American films. We've reviewed actually several films that he's in.
And they're like, girl, the police were here looking for you. They want to talk to you. Why? Well, because there was some girl in the village who was murdered. And it was clear that she recently had an abortion, like an unregistered abortion. So, you know, the rumor is that you do those things. So they were here to talk to you. Do you know who this girl is? And Nina becomes very upset and is asking all these questions. And it's clear to the administrator and her colleague, like, okay, so you do know her. Yes. And then they're trying to explain to her, like, you can't do this. You're going to get in trouble. You're going to lose your entire career. But then it becomes clear that the administrator doesn't want to be involved in all the drama. Because if the police know it's her doing these abortions, they're going to investigate the hospital. And that's going to tie them up for years.
And she's kind of like, oh, I'm only going to respond about this one abortion that I've done. He's like, no.
No, it's going to open up a can of worms that I do not want to deal with. So it's not explicitly said, but I think as the audience, I felt like, at least for the time being, they're going to try to protect her from any trouble. But before they can even get to that, someone knocks on the door. And it's the parents of the stillborn child from the beginning of the movie. And so we realize, oh, they must have been contacted because the internal investigation is complete. And I think one of the better scenes in this movie, I think this movie is excellent, but one of the better scenes is the administrator reading off the findings because it's all medical terms.
He reads it's clinical is the way is his manner. Which
And it's clear that these two people, the young lady who just delivered the stillborn baby, she's only 18. And this man, I'm not going to say he's ignorant because we don't know, but he's looking like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then the administrator finishes and folds up the thing like, well, that's what it is. And, you know, God wouldn't give you more than you can handle or something like that.
Well, he says like these kind of trials teach us to learn how to deal with despair or something like that. And then this bird hits the window.
And dies. The end. Yeah. Now, many symbols, but I think probably the most important relates to the story that Nina tells one of her NSA hookups. She says that when she was a girl, her sister and her snuck out of the house and went to like some body of water.
This lake where they would get fish.
And the sister got stuck in the mud like quicksand. And of course, Nina panicked because she thought her sister was going to die. And as the audience, I'm like, oh my God, is she telling a story about how her sister died? But really, it's a story about how she was too scared to help her sister.
She was too scared to go in and get her, and she was too scared
to go get help.
Because they were told not to sneak out and go to the lake.
So she watched her sister struggle, but was ultimately able to get out on her own. So her sister's safe, y'all.
And has two kids.
But, so that's a story she tells, which I think kind of informs how she's behaving now. Like,
and how she sees herself.
Because the opening of the film is like this 10-minute shot of this creature-looking thing.
A mud woman, a mud creature.
A mud creature. You don't learn till a little bit later when you see breasts that it's like probably a woman. And then after she tells a story about her sister, it's like, oh, it's a representation of Nina. But the opening is this long shot of this mud creature sort of like slowly wading the water, like this dark water.
In the dark, yeah. Well, and also we see Nina sitting naked at her table, and then she's replaced by the mud creature, and then there's a sex scene with the mud creature. So it's a personification of Nina.
And the final shot of the film is not the bird hitting the window. It's actually, we get another like 5-minute shot of the mud creature still wading in the water, but this time the background is like spring. It's pretty flowers, it appears.
And shambling off into daybreak, kind of. And I think the title is also quite meaningful for several reasons as well.
But, oh gosh, there's so much to talk about. I would say that you wrote a really nice review of this film last
In Venice, I actually was quite proud of that review, yeah.
And so I'll put a link to it below because I think you explain a lot of things that we probably don't have time for right now. But so the first thing that I want you to talk about is the cinematography.
Oh, Arseni Khachaturan, who Guadagnino hired to do Bones and All for him as cinematographer. Yeah, I think well, first of all, this reminded me of like classic works by Carlos Regadas or Christian Mungiu or even Sergei Loznitsa. But what I was really thinking of watching this both times is Chantal Akerman's Jean Dielman, which we also have a review of, that's probably one of the most, I think that's one of the best films probably ever made, really, where Delphine Seyrig is the housewife that's prostituting herself. But that film is about control. Both of those films are about control. But whereas that film is kind of about a distillation of time as a controlling mechanism, I think that April is about space and moreover like occupied space and a woman's body as an occupied space. Because I think a lot of the cinematography are all these kind of long shots, these of deep into rooms that are empty, and slowly they kind of fill up with figures, because I think the meaning that we're supposed to derive from a lot of these empty, sterile rooms is that they are meaningless until they are impregnated with something. And much like how all of the women and or female characters, because there's a cow that is importantly symbolic in this, they are kind of meaningless unless they're tethered to another human, whether that be a child or a husband. And I think that very intricately, the film is giving us that message. And in between those beats, we get where Nina is actually free it's from her perspective, where she's driving around. And I think we had a really great discussion that I think we should touch on too, about mechanisms of control that the women in this film are using that actually the ways that they can exert control actually are hurtful towards them.
Well, let's talk about it, because we see several women. I mean, first off, the woman whose child dies during delivery, or is dead as it's being delivered in the beginning of the film, Nina tells her colleague, her ex, who's doing the investigation, she goes, well, when I told that mother her child was dead, she looked relieved and fully at peace. And he looks at her like, bitch, don't you say that to anyone else, because they will surely think you did it on purpose.
But David's also saying the procedure, because this woman hadn't been seen at this hospital, so they had no records of her. So
there was no prenatal care.
The procedure would have been to do a C-section. And Nina says that woman did not want a C-section. And both the administrator and David say, that doesn't matter, you should have done it. But she was honoring that woman's wishes for her own body. And of course, that proves to be detrimental.
Then we meet another young lady who's 16, whose mother has brought her to Nina because she's married, the 16-year-old, to a 17-year-old, and they're trying to get pregnant, and the 16-year-old can't get pregnant. And the mother wants to know why. And so Nina's examining her and saying, you're perfectly healthy. It's just, your body's not ready to get pregnant, but you will when the time's right. And the young lady expresses, like, I wouldn't mind getting pregnant in 5 years. And then you can see Nina's wheels turning, like, okay, I'm gonna hook you up.
And she does.
And she gives her a bag of birth control, like, listen, you take these pills every day, okay? And don't tell anyone I gave them to you. It'll be our little secret.
Mm-hmm. And you'll keep coming back to me. And when you want to get pregnant, stop taking them.
But it's also clear that this young girl is not sure of, like, what's happening. Like, I got the sense that Nina, I mean, there's so much going on, because Nina seems very sad.
Yes.
And I find that this characterization is so interesting because I think her actions of like cruising around looking for like no strings attached sex, she lives in a very, I'm assuming her money's not so thin that she can't live somewhere nicer, but like her place is very drab.
I think she's putting herself in a place of martyrdom, and I think that's because that's why that story that she tells about her childhood is so. She is the mud woman. She's just stuck between a rock and a hard place, and she's keeping herself there kind of out of self-punishment.
But I think that the self-punishment I think is important because she's also being reckless, right? She's performing these procedures that could get her in big trouble and also probably get these women in trouble. She's doling out pills, like almost like forcing these people to take them. Not forcing, but like really trying to help them. And it's like, you might tell the wrong person because she's really relying on people keeping this quiet.
Well, the way she's finding sex also leaves her vulnerable to violence. In the first hookup, punches her.
Yeah, he takes her head and bashes it into the steering wheel.
Because you gasped.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course. But I also think it's interesting that, so then there's that lady. Then, of course, the special needs girl who repeatedly is getting abortions as a form of birth control.
Mm-hmm. And her sister, Zia,
also
refusing to take birth control. But again, like that's some of their ways of exerting some control over their body.
Right.
But it works. Those are working against them. And I think, Nina's a prime example of that. But I think she's doing that because she feels that is where her worth is.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think it's an interesting contrast to Nina, who has access to, like if she were to get pregnant or were to contract an STI, she could get treatment or, treat herself or go somewhere where she could get treatment. So it's interesting how her behavior is so different because she has more access, but then maybe because of her depression, the self-punishing, she doesn't have like access to like enjoy her life. So
Right.
she has the control that maybe these women wish they did, but then she's not doing much with it.
Well, David's like, well, why don't you find another man? She's like, he's trying to find out why they broke up, and she's like, why are we talking about this? And he's like, well, if you don't want a man, why don't you have a child? And it's just like, again, she's a non-entity without something else to define her. But he also makes a point, and the administrator, I think, says something about this. This comes up in their conversation as well, but like, just let the nurses that do that for extra money on the side. And Nina says, well, I could save them. Like I'm the best qualified to be doing these backdoor abortions. But the profound line that both times sticks out to me is she says, how can I deny them? And I think that stems back to her girlhood. Like she denied a woman, her sister, assistance.
But it's interesting, like allowing one moment to define how you navigate the rest of your life in a way that's detrimental to you.
And she's stuck in the mud,
Literally.
And then I think it's also ironic that this brother-in-law that murdered the deaf-mute sister-in-law, he's the one that gets her out of the mud.
Yeah, when her SUV's stuck in the mud, he literally like pushes her out.
And it's that action that metaphorically sets off the catalysm at the end that I don't think, it's not like a happy ending, but I think that it suggests that maybe that was what is maybe allowing her to be unstuck a bit.
I did want to mention that, the subject matter is bleak and the film looks bleak, but it's not as traumatic. I mean, I'll get to some sort of intense visuals, but I think there's this sense of dread of something's going to happen to Nina.
Yes.
Where I felt like I was holding my breath for 2+ hours.
Well, you kept saying, is she going to kill him? Is she going to run him over? Like those flashes of violence in like a Haneke film or Catherine Breillat, where it's like something terrible is going to happen.
And nothing does. And so I think it's really effective because the obvious things like, oh, she's going to be arrested or, she's going to kill this man or it's all very peaceful, and the most sort of like extreme things are kind of the most natural things.
Yeah.
So the film opens with what looks like an actual childbirth, like a vaginal birth. Then we see an abortion, but it's a really long shot of Nina doing her work, but you just see the young lady's abdomen, so you don't see the movements. But then the young lady gets up, and we see that she's bloody. That's obviously extreme. Then we see after she, as the mud woman, has sex with her ex, the man investigating her, we get a really long shot of his flaccid penis, which is really interesting.
It's interesting because that shot is almost of them. And I think it's interesting that she's personifying herself as the mud woman again in that scenario, whereas it's in her best interest that he is happy with her right now. So they kind of have a sexual reunion. So I found that telling. But also you see the outline of their bodies that kind of look like a continent. That's how we're kind of visualizing it. And that long shot, I think, is meant to juxtapose with that abdomen of the deaf mute girl's abortion. Like, and it's about space again. Like the space of this human's, like he's completely free.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing that is going to be tampering with that.
And then we see the C-section. Well, actually, we see the epidural happening, and then the C-section delivery.
And again, at the C-section that should have happened in the beginning, I think Nina is like representative as a doorway between life and death. And I think that in a mercurial way, much like spring, i.e. April, because April is the month that this stillborn birth happened. But and also the film is filled with thunderstorms, rain. Like it's birth, rebirth, but also death. Everything's in a state of flux.
I know we have nurses and doctors who watch. I'm curious for people who are involved in like labor and delivery, because watching the woman, specifically the one who gave birth naturally, I wonder how many like medical staff get kicked in the head. Because at one point, the woman giving birth is like, her leg is on one of the medical staff trying to pull this damn baby out. And I just kept thinking, oh my God. How many people get kicked in the head?
Well, even in the C-section, when they take the kid out of her tummy and they're just make that kid scream.
Well, in those instances, oh yeah, how they have to slap that baby to. It's all. But I think that's so interesting that the most extreme moments are kind of like the most natural.
Well, yeah,
right, like a nude body.
That's life.
The deliveries, the C-section, interestingly, is the least traumatic visually of the four moments. And then everything else just feels very like run-of-the-mill day, like she's just bebopping around. We get the scene where at one point there are these men with cows kind of like creating some little disturbance.
Yeah, she's driving at night and we see these cows being yanked all over, and then in the back of one of these trucks is this starved-looking cow with her offspring chained there, and Nina's gazing at it, and it's like, well, this is a very literal metaphor, I think, for how women are treated, not just in this country, where this film is not being shown.
I think this movie is exceptional. I will say, because I'm not giving it a perfect score, because it does feel a little long. I think some of these extended shots could have been, it didn't need to be 2+ hours maybe. It could have been 2 hours. That's I just have to be honest. There were a few moments where I thought we didn't have to look at this for this long. But there are times when it has a lot of impact, and I think it was very necessary.
Oh, I love the scene at the end where she's being interrogated by the administrator, who's credited as the head doctor, but you see that clock above her, and you just hear it slowly ticking. It's just like she's like the blast off to her doom. I don't know, there's so much about it I really love. This was, out of all the films I saw last year, this was the film I gave the highest rating to. But yeah, again, it's a film that you kind of have to be in the mood for.
Yeah, this is not like, oh, Wednesday after work, I'm just gonna pop this on. No.
No, and then, in the long lineage of abortion films that precede it, of course, I think of Claude Chabrol's The Story of Women, and how Nina feels kind of counterintuitive to someone like the real life person Isabelle Huppert played in that, who was giving abortions during World War II France, but only for profit and not caring about what happened to any of the people. And it's interesting how both those women are stuck in this place, and for different reasons, but one with an allegiance to her kind, to other women, and the other kind of an enemy. But yeah.
What would you give April?
4.5, 4.5.
I would also give April 4.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.